I never thought my peaceful morning rides with Thunder would turn into a full-blown neighborhood war, but that's exactly what happened when the HOA, and particularly Mrs. Walsh, decided that horses didn't belong on public roads. What they didn't expect, my quiet dad was about to be sworn in as the new mayor. What would you do if your HOA's power trip suddenly crashed into your family's surprising political influence? Let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? The loud bang of Mrs. Walsh's front door slamming made Thunder jump beneath me. There she stood, pink fluffy bathrobe, hair rollers, face twisted like she'd just bitten into a lemon. "You stop right there," she screeched, pointing a bony finger at me. "That filthy animal doesn't belong on our streets." I gently pulled on Thunder's reins, bringing my beautiful chestnut quarter horse to a calm stop. "Good morning, Mrs. Walsh," I said with a smile so forced it hurt my cheeks. "Beautiful day for a ride, isn't it?" Thunder snorted softly, almost as if he agreed. We had been riding through Willow Creek Estates for 3 years now, ever since Dad and I moved here after Mom passed away. These morning rides weren't just a routine, they were my connection to her. She had been the one who taught me to ride. Mrs. Walsh stomped down her perfectly manicured lawn, her fuzzy slippers slapping against the pavement. "Look at what that beast is doing to our road, hoof marks everywhere. Do you have any idea how much we pay for road maintenance in this neighborhood?" I glanced down. The spotless asphalt barely had a trace of Thunder's shoes. "The road looks fine to me, Mrs. Walsh, and this is a public road, not private HOA property." Her face turned a deeper shade of red. "Don't you get smart with me, young lady. I'm on the HOA board, and we have rules about livestock. This isn't some farm." A few neighbors had started peeking out of their front doors, watching. "Thunder isn't livestock. He's my pet and my riding companion," I explained, keeping my voice calm, though my heart pounded. "And I've checked with the city. Horseback riding is completely legal on all public roads. We'll see about that." She yanked her phone from her bathrobe pocket. "I'm calling Mr. Perkins right now." "Great. Mr. Perkins, the HOA president, a man who once sent my dad a 7-page letter about our grass being a 1/4 inch too tall." "Feel free," I said, nudging Thunder forward. "Have a nice day, Mrs. Walsh." As we trotted away, I heard her furiously jabbing at her phone, her voice shrill. "Harold, it's Diane Walsh. That Miller girl is riding her horse through the neighborhood again. We need to do something immediately." Mr. Rodriguez, my neighbor from across the street, stepped off his porch as I passed. "Don't let her bother you, Ellie," he said quietly. "Some people just need something to complain about." I sighed. "Thanks, Mr. Rodriguez. Thunder and I try to be respectful." "I know you do," he smiled. "My granddaughter loves watching you ride by each morning. Reminds her of the horses back in Texas." That made me smile for real. "Maybe she can pet Thunder sometime?" She'd love that. The rest of my ride was peaceful. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed on lawns, and Thunder's steady hoofbeats created a soothing rhythm. But peace wouldn't last long. When I got home, Dad was already gone. His job at City Hall kept him busy. Lately, he had been extra busy with some mysterious project he wouldn't tell me about. After unsaddling Thunder and giving him fresh hay and water, I headed inside. That's when I saw it, a cream-colored envelope stuck in our screen door. "Violation notice," printed in bold red letters. My stomach knotted as I ripped it open. "Dear Miller family, it has come to the attention of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association that you are in violation of Covenant 7. 4.2. No livestock, poultry, or other animals, except common household pets, shall be kept on any lot or common areas. Your continued housing and parading of a horse through our community streets constitutes a serious violation of community standards. You are hereby ordered to remove said livestock within 48 hours or face a $500 initial fine, followed by $100 daily penalties. Additionally, riding horses on community streets is strictly prohibited, effective immediately. Regards, Harold Perkins, HOA President. My hands shook as I read it again. They wanted me to get rid of Thunder. That wasn't going to happen. This was our home. He was family. I grabbed my phone and called Dad, straight to voicemail. Dad, the HOA left a notice saying we have to get rid of Thunder in 48 hours. They're trying to fine us $500. Please call me back. I don't know what to do. I shoved my phone in my pocket, grabbed my backpack, and walked to the bus stop. From across the street, Mrs. Walsh smirked at me, arms crossed. Next to her stood Mr. Perkins, his bald head gleaming in the sunlight, watching me with narrowed eyes. "Your little pony show is over," Mrs. Walsh called out. "This is a respectable neighborhood, not a barnyard." I kept walking, pretending I didn't hear, but my eyes stung with angry tears. They couldn't take Thunder away, they just couldn't. That afternoon, my best friend Zoe nearly jumped out of her seat when I slammed my locker shut. "Whoa, what's wrong with you today?" "The HOA is trying to make me get rid of Thunder," I said, blinking back tears. "They left a notice saying he's livestock. They're threatening to fine us." Zoe's eyes widened. "What? But you've had Thunder for years. Your dad checked all the rules before you moved in, right?" "Of course he did." I pulled out the crumpled violation notice. "Look at this. $500 fine, then $100 a day." Zoe scanned it, her freckled face growing red with anger. "This is so stupid and totally unfair." "I know." The warning bell rang. As we rushed to class, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept circling back to Thunder, to Mrs. Walsh's smug face, to the thought of losing my horse, my connection to Mom. When I got home, Dad still wasn't there. A note sat on the kitchen counter, working late again. Pizza money in the usual spot. "Don't worry about the HOA, I'll handle it tomorrow. Love, Dad." I crumpled the note. How could he be so calm? The HOA was threatening to take Thunder away in less than 48 hours. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Zoe, "OMG. Check the neighborhood Facebook page now." I opened the app and felt my stomach drop. Mrs. Walsh had started a war. I stared in horror at the neighborhood Facebook page. Mrs. Walsh had posted a blurry picture of me riding Thunder down the street with the caption, "Health hazard in our neighborhood. The Miller family is keeping a horse in their backyard and allowing it to defecate on our roads. Property values plummeting. Children at risk of disease. Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7 p.m. to address this crisis." The comments section was a war zone. "This is outrageous. My daughter has allergies." Karen Thompson. "I pay too much in HOA fees to live next to a farm." Harold Perkins. "Has anyone reported this to animal control?" Diane Walsh. My stomach twisted into knots. These were my neighbors, people who used to smile and wave. But then I saw the defenders. "That girl takes excellent care of her horse. This is ridiculous." Miguel Rodriguez. "The Millers checked all the permits before building that stable. It's fully legal." Sarah Chun. "Pretty sure public roads aren't HOA jurisdiction anyway." Tom Blackwell. I wasn't alone. I immediately called Dad again, straight to voicemail. I paced the kitchen, heart pounding. What do I do? Then I remembered. Dad kept every property document in his office. I ran upstairs, rummaging through his files, my hands shaking. Then, jackpot, a folder labeled Property Willow Creek. Inside were stable construction permits, city approved. Our original HOA agreement, a copy of the HOA bylaws, highlighted. I flipped to the section about livestock. Dad had underlined it and written a note in the margin. Horses exempt. City Ordinance 14.3 supersedes HOA rules. Confirmed with City Attorney, May 15th. Next to it was a sticky note with a phone number. Jennifer Wilson, City Attorney. Dad had already checked this. The HOA couldn't ban Thunder. The city's laws protected us. I grabbed my phone, snapped pictures of everything, and then headlights swept across the living room windows. Cars were parking at the Perkins house. The HOA emergency meeting was starting. I stuffed the documents in my backpack and marched across the street. My hands were sweaty. My heart pounded. But there was no way I was letting them decide Thunder's fate without me there. The HOA meeting. And my showdown with Mrs. Walshy rang the Perkins doorbell. Mrs. Perkins answered, eyes widening when she saw me. "Ellie, what are you doing here?" I squared my shoulders. "I'm here for the HOA meeting about my horse. Since it concerns me, I should be present." "Well," she hesitated. "This is for homeowners only, and you're just—" "My father owns our home." I cut her off. "He's working late, so I'm representing our family's interests." Mr. Rodriguez appeared behind her. "The girl has a right to be here, Barbara. Let her in." With a reluctant sigh, she stepped aside. The living room was packed. About 20 neighbors sat in folding chairs. Mrs. Walsh sat front and center, arms crossed, glaring daggers at me. Mr. Perkins stood at a small podium. "Ah, Eleanor Miller," he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "How interesting that you've joined us. We were just discussing the horse situation. His name is Thunder." I walked to the front of the room. "And I have information relevant to this discussion." Mrs. Walsh jumped up. "This is outrageous. She's not a homeowner. She can't just barge in here and let her speak." Mr. Rodriguez interrupted. Several others nodded. I took a deep breath, opened Dad's file, and spoke loud enough for the whole room to hear. The HOA notice claims that keeping a horse violates Covenant 7.42. However, I held up the bylaws. City Ordinance 14.3 specifically allows horses on residential properties that meet stable requirements, which our property does. I handed Mr. Perkins the permit for our stable. This was approved by both the city and the HOA Architectural Committee 2 years ago. Mr. Perkins adjusted his glasses. "Well, that may be, but riding the horse through the neighborhood is still also protected." I didn't let him finish. City Ordinance 14.3 states that horses are permitted on all public roadways within city limits. Willow Creek Estates has public roads maintained by city taxes. The HOA has no jurisdiction over them. Murmurs spread through the room. Mrs. Walsh's face turned crimson. "The issue isn't just the mess," she snapped. "It's the safety hazard. What if that beast goes wild and tramples someone?" I kept my voice calm and even. Thunder is a professionally trained quarter horse. He's more predictable than most drivers in this neighborhood. A few people chuckled. Mrs. Walsh looked ready to explode. Mr. Perkins cleared his throat. "Regardless of city ordinances, the HOA has the right to create more restrictive covenants for the good of the community. The board will vote now." The front door swung open. "Actually," a voice rang out from the doorway, "you don't have that right when it conflicts with city law." Everyone turned. There stood Dad, still in his work suit, looking exhausted but determined. Behind him stood a woman in a professional blazer, holding a leather portfolio. Mrs. Walsh gasped. "James, we were just having a friendly discussion about—" "Dad," cut her off. "I heard everything, Diane." He gestured to the woman beside him. "And I've brought Jennifer Wilson, the city attorney, to clarify a few legal points." The room went silent. Mr. Perkins turned pale. "What exactly are you planning, James?" Dad smiled, but not kindly. "That's an excellent question, Robert, one that I think everyone here will find very interesting." The mayor's bombshell dad stepped forward, calmly placing a thick folder on the table. "Before we go any further," he said, looking around the room, "I have something important to announce." He took a deep breath. "As of 3 p.m. today, I was sworn in as the new mayor of Willow Creek." Boom! The room erupted in gasps. Mrs. Walsh froze. Her mouth literally fell open. Mr. Perkins dropped his precious HOA binder. Papers scattered across the floor. "Mayor?" I whispered, stunned. Dad squeezed my shoulder. "Surprise!" The entire room was stunned into silence. My dad, my quiet, practical, never-rock-the-boat dad, was now the mayor of Willow Creek. Mrs. Walsh's face was frozen in horror, like she had just swallowed a lemon whole. Mr. Perkins scrambled to pick up his scattered papers, his hands shaking. Finally, Mrs. Walsh found her voice. "This is a joke." She let out a sharp laugh. "You ran for mayor just to protect your daughter's horse?" Dad folded his arms. "No, Diane, I ran for mayor because this town needs leadership that actually follows the law, not power-hungry HOA board members who think they can make their own rules." A few neighbors chuckled. Dad turned to the police officers still standing by the door. "Officers, thank you for responding tonight, but as the new mayor, I can confirm that there is no legal violation happening here." The taller officer nodded. "That's what we were starting to figure out." Dad picked up the folder he'd brought and slid it onto the table in front of the HOA board. Inside this file are 3 important documents. First, the official city attorney's opinion confirming that the HOA has no jurisdiction over public roads. Second, the original land survey of Willow Creek Estates, proving that the roads in this neighborhood have been public property since 1892. And third, the city's founding charter, which explicitly protects horseback riding as a legal activity within city limits. Mr. Perkins snatched up the papers, flipping through them with growing panic. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Oh, but it is," Dad said calmly. The crowd erupted in whispers. "So the HOA has been lying to us?" a woman asked. "They've been fining people illegally," a man near the back added. Mrs. Walsh's face turned purple. "This changes nothing. The HOA board has already voted to ban horses from the neighborhood." Dad tilted his head. "Really? And do you have the authority to override city law?" Silence. Dad turned to Mr. Perkins. "Robert, do you want to explain to everyone how HOA rules cannot legally contradict city ordinances?" Mr. Perkins looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I... Dad sighed and looked out at the crowd. "Folks, let me make this simple. Thunder is not going anywhere. My daughter has every legal right to ride her horse on these roads, just like she has for the past 3 years, and anyone else who wants to ride through Willow Creek Estates. They're welcome to as well." Boom! The room erupted. Some neighbors cheered, others whispered furiously, and Mrs. Walsh, she stormed toward the door, shoving past people on her way out. "This isn't over," she hissed at Dad. He smiled. "Oh, but it is." She slammed the door behind her. Mr. Perkins looked at the remaining board members, his face ashen. "What do we do now?" A woman I recognized, Mrs. Jackson, one of the older board members, stood up. "I think we need to take a hard look at our leadership," she said, staring right at Perkins. More murmurs of agreement. I could barely believe. The HOA board was turning on itself. The fallout by the next morning. The entire neighborhood was talking about what had happened. The HOA Facebook page was on fire. The HOA has been illegally enforcing rules they had no right to. Mayor Mitchell shut them down in public. Is it time to vote these people out? Then, a new announcement from Mr. Perkins appeared. "Due to recent developments, I am stepping down as HOA president effective immediately." What? The man who tried to ruin my life just quit? And he wasn't the only one. By the end of the day, 4 HOA board members had resigned, including Mrs. Walsh. I found out later that after Dad exposed her for posting fake accusations online, she got hit with a defamation lawsuit from another neighbor. It turns out I wasn't the first person she'd tried to bully, but I was the last, the best revenge. A trail named after me. A week later, Dad called me into the kitchen with a grin. "I have one last surprise for you." He handed me a piece of paper. "What is this?" I asked. "The city is officially restoring the historic bridle paths through Willow Creek." I blinked. "Wait, you mean..." Dad nodded. "We're creating a public trail system for horseback riders, bikers, and walkers. And guess what?" I scanned the page and then stopped cold. "The Eleanor Miller riding trail? They were naming it after me." Dad laughed. "You fought for your right to ride. Now future riders will know exactly who to thank." I stared at the words, tears welling in my eyes. I thought back to all those mornings riding thunder, feeling close to Mom. Now, this place would always remember me, forever. Final thoughts. Mrs. Walsh tried to erase me. Instead, I became part of this town's history. Mr. Perkins tried to scare me. Instead, he got run out of his own HOA. And my dad? He went from the quiet guy on the block to mayor of Willow Creek. Oh, and in case you're wondering, thunder. And I still ride through the neighborhood every single morning. And now, people wave. Some even say, "Good morning, Eleanor." Funny how things change.